Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for waiting. We had a couple of technical issues before beginning, and also some good news. Vicky is promoting her new book. We're going to
Oh,
get to that very soon, and it's right there on the Idaho 4 and the Brian Koberger case. She reported something very interesting about that we'll touch upon later, but the title of this particular Substack Live is what are the Epstein Files anyway? And
yeah,
it's a fundamental question that I think reporters like us, Vicky,
yeah,
we ask it from the beginning because we have navigated those dockets. And it seems to be a word that is a phrase that people assume that they know. But these are records across sprawling dockets. There are dozens of lawsuits, criminal cases, uh, investigations, including Senate investigations that this
yeah.
could pertain to. And so I just wanted to open our conversation with that broad question. What we've talked about it, we've seen a million headlines about the Epstein files. What does that phrase mean to you? I have a hard time defining it in less than a few minutes, but I'll give it a stab.
Well, to me, Adam, you're exactly right. It just means all the discovery in all of the litigation, civil and criminal, um, that exist around um, Jeffrey Epstein. And, so I don't think, and, I know that I'm in the Epstein files, but that, purely because of my role, as a reporter. And so, there's nothing nefarious on the face of it if somebody's in the Epstein files. The question is what they're doing in there. But I think so. Yeah, to me, there's this misnomer out there that one, there's a client list. Having known Jeffrey Epstein, the likelihood that he kept a sort of Excel spreadsheet of men that he had compromat on, I think is pretty small. I mean, this is a guy who barely appeared to work. I mean, what he was an expert in was soft power, if you will. It was about sort of having people in for coffee and schmoozing and networking at the world's sort of the international 0.001%. He wouldn't have needed to have kept an Excel sheet to remind himself of the list of VIPs in his orbit, whom he may or may not have blackmailable material. So I think that that's a misnomer. What I'm sure is out there is all this legal documentation, which may be under seal and may have lots and lots of redactions and may well contain the answers to, I think, the fundamental question about Jeffrey Epstein, which is this was a man who benefited enormously from what I would call soft power, from the soft power of his international Rolodex, from all the rich, wealthy men who propped up his financial empire, without which he would not have been able to commit those sexual crimes. And there would, I think, be some explanations as to how his dream team of lawyers back in 2008 were able to get that sweetheart plea deal, remove the federal criminal investigation, and instead let him go to jail on a cushy, state plea deal. So I think that people are right, that there are real important and unanswered questions about the system of power surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. And that's what people want answers to. And I'm sure that there are some answers to that in the legal documentation that, for whatever reason, this administration suddenly doesn't want to release, having said that they would.
Right.
What's your thought?
Right. And to your point, I think when we talk about a client list, some of the clients that I want to know about are the follow the money clients, the people who were paying Jeffrey Epstein hundreds of millions or tens of millions of dollars for his financial services. There's a Senate investigation right now being conducted by a senator who I recently interviewed, Senator Ron Wyden, the
Yeah.
top Democrat on the Finance Committee. And he is doing a very classic type of follow the money investigation. And he has an active investigation into Leon Black.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when Pam Bondi was coming out earlier this year about how she's going to make it all public, she's going to blow it all open, he released one of the first releases of his investigation, Senator Wyden, saying that the audit into now Leon Black, for those who don't know, is a billionaire, former private equity CEO of Apollo Management. He resigned from that post in the wake of this scandal, but that company performed a large scale audit, and their audit into the money that Mr. Black paid to Epstein was about 12 million uh, lower than the actual number, according to Senator Wyden. Now we talk about that the number that the Finance Committee found was 170 million that Leon Black paid to Jeffrey Epstein, 12 million higher than previously identified by Apollo Management's audit. So I want to go back. So the Epstein files to me, with that whole preamble, is any file, and I'm going to take Ro Khanna's definition here. He
Mhm.
proposed an amendment. A lot of folks who are watching right now might have seen that everyone of the Republicans on the Rules Committee voted down an amendment that would have included this language: the Attorney General shall retain, preserve, and compile any records or evidence related to any investigation, prosecution, or incarceration of Jeffrey Epstein. Not later than 30 days after the date of the enactment of this act, the Attorney General shall release and publish any records or evidence related to any investigation, prosecution, or incarceration of Jeffrey Epstein on a publicly accessible website. Now, that's a pretty straightforward definition. One might wonder, well, what about the stuff that probably should remain sealed to protect victims and whatnot? But presumably the DOJ would have their own procedures. Very simple amendment voted down by the Republicans on the Rules Committee, put forward by Ro Khanna and the Democrats on that committee. So I think that's a pretty workable definition. Any record on a criminal investigation, prosecution, I would say lawsuit or any kind of government record that might be interesting. So that's
Yeah.
a pretty expansive definition. A kind of simple but deceptively simple question. Uh, I don't know of one that exists, and you've been covering this longer than I have, Vicky. When AG Bondi went public with this, we're going to get to the bottom of it, we're going to put it all out there. Her first release, she called it the Declassified Epstein Files. And to me, that was a tell. Right at the beginning, I knew that there was nothing in these documents and the Attorney General of the United States was lying. Because to my knowledge, for my decade or so of covering this, I have not encountered evidence suggesting that there is a classified document related to Jeffrey Epstein. Are you aware of any?
No, no. I mean, I think it seems very obvious to me that Pam Bondi, for whatever reason, really, really misspoke. She either had no idea of what she was talking about, which is troubling,
Yeah.
or she did. I mean, I mean, because she talked about the client list. You know, I mean, it felt to me that she was just making it up when she said, "I've got these files on my desk." Um, you know, I mean, put it this way, she's caused more trouble for herself than it's worth. So what, one has to wonder if she would like to go back and rewrite history on that point.
Right.
But yeah, no, you're right. I don't think there's anything classified, but I do think that the difficulties around Jeffrey Epstein are to do with the difficulty of quantifying how people use money, connections, and power for their own ends in this country. And, you're right. I mean, the Leon Black money trail is a concrete thing to go after, because on the face of it, it makes no sense that one of the richest men in the world would turn to Jeffrey Epstein, a high school dropout, for rather than Sullivan and Cromwell, or a reputable firm for tax advice. I mean, it just, something about that just doesn't add up. So if Ron Wyden can go down that rabbit hole and come up with answers, good for him. But I mean, there are other questions around Jeffrey Epstein. For example, we know that his main benefactor, Leslie Wexner, paid him all this money for reasons, again, that still seem murky, that let the same benefactor, Leslie Wexner, one of the richest men again in this country, propelled Jeffrey Epstein to the center of cultural and educational institutions like Harvard and so on. And yet, in 2019, and by the way, all that money enabled Jeffrey Epstein to build his island and his mansions and the places from behind whose walls he then committed all these horrific sexual crimes. And yet, in 2019...
Lost you, Vicky. Out of the feed cut off. When you reconnect, we'll get right back to where you were. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you again. I'm sorry, you were saying?
Well, I think, so for example, this man, this very, very wealthy, powerful man, pays Jeffrey Epstein all this money for reasons that have never been well understood. And then years later, after Jeffrey Epstein is dead, he says, oh, well, Jeffrey Epstein stole from me. I mean, that's just one example. And yet without all of Leslie Wexner's billions, one could make a very good case that Jeffrey Epstein would not have been able to commit the sexual crimes and build this awful protected web. I mean, and I think that people want to know why was with a man who after 2009 had a dodgy track record. It may not have been a federal criminal crime, but he had a dodgy, so what on earth were Bill Gates and the Saudi Crown Prince and still, Bill Clinton, what on earth, and Leon Black, and, if we're to believe it, actually, Elon Musk, which raises questions as to why Elon Musk is rattling, what was it about Jeffrey Epstein that brought them all to the private house of a guy who was sort of well known to be a convicted pedophile? I mean,
right.
These are all completely reasonable questions to ask. There are reasonable questions to ask about the manner of his death. And the idea that in these documents there's nothing, I find a little difficult. I don't know. Do you?
No, I find it, it would be, if it weren't so serious, the proposition would be laughable. Yes, there is more information to be learned about this case, and it is where a lot of people are looking. We've been talking about the Leon Black investigation. Now, that a lot of that came to a head when there were a pair of lawsuits against major banks. There was lawsuits against J.P. Morgan and Deutsche Bank that settled for a large cash settlements, and averting a trial that would have gone to the very questions that you're talking about, Vicky, that go to why has this been a through line of Jeffrey Epstein's life, where there has been a billionaire putting great trust in him. With Les Wexner, there was the fact that he gave him power of attorney at a time when he was a complete unknown, an unfathomable amount of trust in Jeffrey Epstein. Leon Black, as you said, Jeffrey Epstein had a very publicly known dodgy record, and Leon Black was paying him massive amounts of money, as the Wyden investigation has found, way above market rates for someone with this history. And there's never been any real explanation for that. about just want to go back to what we both talked about a little earlier about the fact that A.G. Bondi, in her first shot out the gate, when I knew it was all, frankly, BS, was when she called it the declassified Epstein files. And the two people, we're talking about this case now. We have studied it as closely, pretty much, as anyone. We haven't heard of a classified Jeffrey Epstein file. If one existed, that would be major news that someone thought that there was something related to Jeffrey Epstein that affects the national security. This isn't a marginal, kind of academic question. That the fact that the Attorney General of the United States would use that interchangeably with sealed, even for political reasons, that she thought it would sound cool to hand these MAGA
Yeah,
influencers. And I'm going to get a little indignant here. Remember those pictures of MAGA influencers holding those documents? None of them knew
yeah,
a damn thing about the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. None of them had been in any of the courts like we were. They invited some MAGA influencers because they realized that they wouldn't ask any questions like, why are you calling this declassified? Is there any classified information? Has there been a declassification review? Why was it classified in the first place? They asked a bunch of people who would pose in front of pictures of what they thought were records of sexual abuse, and they smiled. And they
mm,
smiled and they posed for photos because they got great access in Washington, D.C. If you really take a moment to digest that, it's palpably disgusting. The political manipulation that
right.
that entire press conference and that this whole cynical exercise has been about. And I'm usually a just the facts man when discussing this, but let's get a little indignant and outraged here because it is either she should have known or she knew. And I can't imagine which is worse, that what she was selling was complete nonsense. And if you look at the file names of this first release, this tranche of documents, they say USV Maxwell. I opened it up. I'm like, this is all reheated old
Yeah,
records.
yeah. There was nothing new.
Nothing new. Nothing new. And then after this, we're going to blow the lid on it with our MAGA influencer friends.
Yeah,
Then a couple months later, that nope, nothing to see here. Nothing to see. It reeks of political manipulation, cover up, and it reeks of a it reeks of this thing that they're learning after grooming a sense of conspiratorial outrage among their base. The second that they're asked to produce the goods, and there are goods there, like we agree, there are Senate
yeah, yeah.
investigations into goods. There was a money trail that is being investigated by the Senate that was the subject of federal lawsuits that would have gone to trial, but for a settlement, and would have told us a lot more information than we knew about pretty these aren't conspiratorial questions. Why would a billionaire rely upon the financial and tax advice of
Yeah.
a guy who had just served a
It
pedophilia?
makes no, it just, it's a perfectly sensible question that,
Right.
and given Jeffrey Epstein's criminal track record, people are entitled to get an answer to that.
Right.
You're actually, I don't even understand really, since, you're talking about that, how this became so political, um, Adam, I don't actually see what for Trump would be the downside of explaining why they fell out. I mean, he's on the right side of history on that. It maybe a bit later, but he's on the, why not just come out and say, here's what happened? I mean, if you were going to play politics, I mean, Trump's perfectly happy to talk about other things.
Well,
Um,
I wonder what Trump thought about the first release of Jeffrey Epstein documents, which reheated the same flight logs in which he appeared 7 times. If he's going to play this game of and for years had cultivated this deep state mythology, and where the
right.
interest among the MAGA base has been there is an elite uh perverse elite that is lying to you and involved in unspeakable acts of predation. And that's the QAnon segment that they had cultivated, they had groomed for a long time. And now that they have whipped up a number of people with that narrative, they are forced to confront the public record that, that in the narrative of this, everyone who is associated, there is that guilt by association in QAnon. And now
Yeah.
when they see the public record and they see, oh, he does appear 7 times in the flight logs, that's not the type of transparency that this administration seems to be interested in, or telling the story of the finances, going after the powerful people who, remember, the reason prosecutors called this a pyramid scheme of sexual abuse was the way that it operated is that Jeffrey Epstein took out cash in bulk, and he
Yeah.
would pay the money to the cash to young women and girls for massages that escalated into sexual abuse, and gave them a handful of cash to offer to other young girls. And that required money. And that required, according to 2 federal lawsuits that settled, banks looking the other way when mysterious and
Yeah.
unexplained transfers of cash happened in bulk.
Yeah.
When the planes
Yeah.
were that all of this had
Yeah.
rested,
Systemic.
had systemic. And so I think where the transparency ought to happen is on the system-wide thing, because,
Yes.
we've had an accounting of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. We've had the accounting from public access records of when we talk about the Epstein files, a lot of them thousands of files came from fights to unseal them by the press, by Julie K. Brown and other news outlets, including Miami Herald and others, to release and unseal documents that were part of civil litigation. But some civil litigation didn't go to a head, and some
Right.
of that's being investigated.
Yes. 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 And as you know, I mean, Jeffrey Epstein is it's very complicated because it was a pyramid scheme, which means, again, that, I mean, one of the heartbreaking things I think we learned in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial was that how the women, he recruited young women and he then he groomed them, as did she. And then those women then themselves went out and groomed other women. And that, again, is where naming names can be very complicated when somebody is a victim once and then then gets caught up in the whole thing. And I think the other thing is, as Adam, the government brings cases it likes to win, so it keeps the focus, but it keeps the focus very narrow. So the Ghislaine Maxwell trial was very narrow about the sex crimes that went on under her nose, on her watch. But and yes, there was sex trafficking as part of it. But a large amount of the testimony in that trial was about what went on in his Florida home. Right. And so we never, you got glimpses of this bigger world with names, yes, like Trump and Clinton on planes and things, but we never really got to get an understanding of what it all meant because the government had a narrow case and it wanted to win it, which it did.
Right. I think that's such an important point, Vicky, and it goes to the public understanding of what came on. Why do we have transparency about certain things? Because the prosecutors are presenting evidence that will lead to a conviction, that a trial, I ran a headline. I was working for Law and Crime at the time when we were both covering the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. And as a friend and legal analyst who I spoke to put it, a trial is not an inquest. You're not trying to get a complete picture of everything that happened, a presentation of everything that happened related to Jeffrey Epstein, related to Ghislaine Maxwell. You are trying to present evidence to a jury that will convict the defendant about a number of charges. And there's a very good reason the system is supposed to operate that way. It's not supposed to operate that you throw out any allegation that may taint the jury, that because we value the presumption of innocence in this country,
Right.
you have a very targeted presentation of the evidence. But that makes the transparency all the more important. But it also calls for responsibly looking at it. Where does the public record end? What is actually missing? What do we actually not know? And where should I'll be the first to say there are things that should remain sealed to protect the victims. There are
Yeah.
some things that the FBI recovered from Jeffrey Epstein's New York mansion that should not see the light of day because they might include explicit material
Yeah.
of victims. So
Yep.
so what I think the Trump administration did here, and that they're learning the hard way, uh, that they have churned up something and groomed something that they can no longer control, is they
Yeah.
were being sloppy about it. They were suggesting a
Yes.
massive national
Very good word.
security
Yeah.
conspiracy, something that included classified information. They just threw out that word recklessly. They threw out they
Client
played they
list. Yeah.
yeah, and they were not looking deeply at what the actual unanswered questions are. They weren't treating it responsibly in
Right.
the way that I would suggest everything I've seen of Senator Wyden's investigation has done. And that's what I think this moment calls for: actual defining of the terms. What are the Epstein files that you're talking about? What do you want to investigate? What questions are you trying to answer? I want to pivot to one thing because I know we're limited on time. And by the way, for folks, if you're just joining in later, you miss a lot of our Epstein conversation. If you subscribe to All Rise News and Vicky Ward Investigates, you'll find our entire conversation later. And on All Rise News, I recently interviewed Senator Ron Wyden, where he
Ah,
actually surprised me with his answer about the Jeffrey Epstein investigation, and how, in his words, that was actionable information in the Trump administration's possession, and that they have not answered him, they have not acted upon it. So you can
that's
find that in.
fascinating, Adam.
Thank you.
When did you do that?
That was very recent. It was in the past week. So
Oh
very
wow.
fortunate
I'll
to
have to
have
go
the
back and look at
senator.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and one thing about, if you missed that, and again, it's on the website, allrisenews.com. If you find it there, one thing that you'll notice, I mentioned Senator Wyden has a history of investigations with impact. He participated with the Senate Intelligence Committee's investigation for the torture report. He's been very effective in mass surveillance. That scandal, he was one of the leads on that. He had investigated the Hulk Bank scandal, Turkey's state-run bank, and its connections to the Trump administration. So when Senator Wyden opens an investigation into something, the media world should listen. I'll
Right.
put it there, and I know that I'm certainly listening. You can find, his father was a journalist. He spoke about that on the podcast, and I think it colors the way that he governs. He's very tenacious. He's a very strong investigator in the U.S. Senate. So you can find that interview on the
Yep.
website. So I want to turn to the focus of your new book, because you reported something recently about Brian Koberger that I find absolutely fascinating, because at the time of his guilty plea, it was widely reported that that Koberger, we didn't know what the motive was. And I don't
Yeah.
know if this is the motive, but you reported a fact that I wasn't aware of, which is that Brian Koberger was an incel. For
Right.
folks who are not familiar with that term, can you describe what that means,
Hmm.
and what that misogynistic philosophy
Yeah.
may or may not have had to do with this horrible crime?
Yeah. So, I mean, involuntary celibates in cells is a culture that has kind of sprung up over the last decade on the internet. not obviously helped greatly by COVID and the fact that partly thanks to COVID, partly thanks to the fact we live in the social media age, digital age, there's less reason for young men and young women to go out and meet in person than there was, let's say, 30 years ago. And as a result, for many people, lonely people, misfits, people on, disadvantaged people, that their entire social life is on their phone or their laptop. And for all the frustrated young men out there are many more, I think the data is now showing, many more young men out there than there were, say, 20 years ago, who've never had any physical interaction with a woman. And there's now a name given to this group of young men. It's international. They call them incels, and they tend to meet anonymously on the internet and plan something called a day of retribution. They divide the world up into them, and then the women are divided into Beckys and Stacys. Stacys are the sort of nubile women with sort of big social media accounts. Beckys are the more kind of academic. And Chads are what they call the guys who, unlike them, can get either a Becky or a Stacey. And there is an increasingly violent component to. I mean, it's not an organization. It's a culture that you can find it easily, and young men do. And it is increasingly violent. And one of the sort of heroes, an incel hero, is a guy called Elliot Rodger, who back in 2014 was a college student in Santa Barbara, going between two towns of Santa Barbara and Isla Vista, two college towns. And he wrote a diary about his lonely life and how all these women, particularly sorority girls, and his childhood best friend called Maddie had rejected him, and how he was planning his day of retribution, where he was going to go out and murder these women who turned him down. And he made a series of videos sitting in his black BMW and sort of outlining his plans. And he wrote this 160-page, roughly, memoir of his life. He sends the video to his therapist, who sends it to his mother 2 minutes before he goes out, and he does wind up killing and injuring around 16 people, and before eventually the cops find him and he commits suicide. Brian Koberger studied this guy. He saw the videos when he was a psychology major as an undergraduate at DeSales University. He studied serial killers. And, what I do outline in the book is how Brian Koberger's extraordinarily heinous, misogynistic views about women was something that, as once he got to Washington State University, he was unable to keep to himself. And it got him into increasing trouble, the way he treated and spoke to women, both in the class and without the class. And you see him basically disintegrate professionally in the weeks before the murders. By the time he's got to November the 13th, which is the night of the murders, he's kind of at the point of no return in terms of his career. He's blown this opportunity, which was a considerable opportunity given that he had been a heroin addict as a teenager. He'd been a social misfit, had no friends, and come from extreme poverty. So the idea that here he is, he's got to, a prestigious university, Washington State University. He's being paid to be a teaching assistant. He's being paid to get his PhD in criminology. But the way he treats women and talks to them, grades them, follows them, spooks them out, becomes such a problem for him that he loses everything. And so I think that narrative, Adam, has definitely not been out there before. And I think obviously in the book, I talk about the fact that the families of the victims and the friends, they don't know for sure, but they believe that Maddie Mogan, that Koberger was just going for one person that night, and that was Maddie Mogan, who it may or may not be coincidence that she has the same name as Elliot Rodger's one female friend who he promised himself he'd go out and murder. Um, and and obviously that night, it was completely by chance that Maddie's childhood friend Kaylee had come to visit the house. She had long ago moved out, so it probably was a surprise for Koberger to find two people in Maddie's bed that night. And then obviously it was chance that Xana Knodel was still up as he was coming down the stairs, that she was still up, having just received a DoorDash delivery. And so, I think the assumption that the families and the friends have is that he went in there intending to kill one person, obviously wound up killing 4. Even so, nearly got away with it. His only mistake was to leave the knife sheath with a touch of his DNA by the bed. I mean, and when I go into the TikTok of the investigation, you see that the police really had nothing until sort of 6 weeks in, a lab came back and were able to construct a family tree using, a genealogical website. And once they got to a name, then they were able to match up what the images, the video canvassing of the car, and then they were able to put his driver's license, and then they were able to check security cameras and put it all together. But it all hung on that DNA. And the fact that they never found a murder weapon, he'd got plates. He was clever enough to know that he was driving around with no plates on the front of the car because they were that in Pennsylvania, that's okay. And then after the murders, he went and switched the plates and got Idaho plates. I mean, this guy, there's a reason he had studied not just criminals, but crimes. He knew what to do.
It's fascinating, and I'm looking forward to, and sad, and I really am looking forward to reading your book. Also, because of what you just touched upon with it was from your website that I learned for the first time that Brian Koberger was an incel, and I think it speaks to a particular sickness and misogyny in our culture. We talk about the case of Andrew Tate and toxic influencers, and how much of that really contributes to greater social dysfunction. This idea that toxic masculine internet culture just causing a bunch of social ills.
Well,
I hate to cut things short. I am off actually very soon.
Sorry, Brian.
No worries. No.
My screen is going in and out. It's all tech things going wrong today. No, but I'm just saying that onto your point about toxic masculinity. I mean, one of the sad things that, as far as my reporting tells me, is that Koberger's parents were decent people who did their best. So, I mean, that's obviously troubling. I mean, it is troubling. It speaks to the times that we live in. All right, Adam, thank you. I know you've got a plane to get.
So I'll just give one quick closing remarks. The reason that I'm about to go right now, I'm about to head to the airport because now for folks who are just tuning in now and you're wondering, hey, what happened to the discussion about Jeffrey Epstein and the broader ones about Brian Koberger and the other topics, we'll be posting this on our website. So subscribe to All Rise News, subscribe to Vicky Ward Investigates. I'm heading to the airport right now to go to Nashville because tomorrow is a hearing in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and it could be the day that if a judge affirms the magistrate's ruling, it could be the day that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is ordered released on bail. And we'll find out whether he will be released straight into the custody of immigration enforcement or to his family in Maryland if there's a ruling expected to happen today that would protect him, at least that he would receive his due process rights in Maryland before anything else happens, so he can await trial, so he can answer to the charges. Heading to the airport, in about 20 minutes. And I'll be reporting live from Nashville for that. So subscribe if you want to learn what happens. Thank you very much, Vicky. I look forward
Yeah.
to reading your book, and I look forward to other conversations ahead.
Yes, likewise. Take care.
Have a good one. You too. Bye-bye.